Welcome back to Talk Tickers. I'm your host, and today we are doing a deep dive into, a really massive pivot.
Huge, a complete corporate metamorphosis, really.
Right, because if you are an investor or honestly just someone tracking the future of medicine, you need to understand what's happening at Pfizer right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at their Q4 2025 earnings call today.
And the stakes are, they couldn't be higher. In December 2028, Pfizer is going to wake up, look at their global revenue, and find out that the patent for one of the most profitable heart medications in history has just vanished.
Poof, gone.
Exactly. The generic competitors are going to flood the market overnight. Billions of dollars in reliable revenue just wiped off the balance sheet.
And this isn't some, bearish Wall Street rumor. Albert Bourla, the CEO, literally looked analysts in the eye on this call and said they have zero legal strategy to stop it.
Zero. Which is wild to hear on an earnings call.
Yeah.
So today, our mission is to unpack this $62 billion blueprint. How are they going to basically science their way out of a corporate death spiral?
It's the ultimate ticking clock scenario. You've got this pharmaceutical titan forced to execute a massive pivot while still steaming ahead at full speed.
Right, because for the last few years, we all viewed Pfizer through one specific lens.
They were the COVID company.
Yeah, exactly, the COVID company. And they had a windfall that defies historical comparison. But that era is over.
Definitively over. Now they are staring down what the industry calls the LOE cliff.
Loss of exclusivity.
Right. And that cliff starts tearing chunks out of their balance sheet in 2026.
So if you're holding this stock or thinking about buying in, this LOE cliff is the gravitational force warping everything in this transcript. Every breakthrough, every acquisition, every cost cut. It's all a reaction to replacing that evaporating revenue.
They're trying to pull off 3 monumental pivots at the same time.
Which is terrifying and exciting. We're talking about carving out a massive slice of the $150 billion obesity market.
Right, and totally restructuring oncology with a massive acquisition.
And, deploying artificial intelligence on a scale that requires literal supercomputers.
And they have to do it flawlessly.
Right. No margin for error. So let's get into the headline numbers. Look at the scoreboard. What did Chief Financial Officer Dave Denton actually deliver?
So the top line number for the full year 2025 was $62.6 billion in revenue.
$62 billion, which sounds like an impenetrable fortress of cash, but...
But if you look at the year-over-year comparables, it's actually a 2% operational decline.
Right, a drop. But we have to translate the Wall Street jargon here. You have to strip out the COVID stuff to see the real story.
Exactly. Denton was incredibly deliberate about separating the pandemic portfolio from the baseline business.
Because it's basically 2 different companies sharing a spreadsheet right now.
Totally. If you take away the COVID products, so the vaccines and Paxlovid, the operational revenue of the underlying company actually grew by 6%.
6% is solid. But that COVID drop is brutal.
Oh, in the fourth quarter alone. The COVID portfolio cratered by 40% operationally year over year.
40%, wow.
Yeah. Denton blamed narrower U.S. vaccine recommendations and just a general drop in Paxlovid demand because of lower severe infection rates.
Which, as humans, we love lower infection rates.
Right. Great for society.
But terrible for Pfizer's accounting reality. It creates this massive vacuum.
But the counterbalance is the non-COVID assets. Those grew 9% operationally in that same quarter.
That's the heavy lifters, right?
Yeah.
Abrysvo for RSV, Eliquis for blood clots.
The Prevnar vaccines, and obviously the Vyndaqel family of cardiovascular drugs.
Right. So that underlying strength let them post an adjusted diluted earnings per share of $3.22 for the year.
Which actually beat expectations, and they returned $9.8 billion to shareholders in dividends.
So they are projecting stability. But then, reading through Denton's remarks, he just casually drops an absolute bombshell.
Well, the impairment chart.
Yes. A $4.4 billion non-cash intangible asset impairment charge in Q4.
It's massive.
$4.4 billion. When I read that, I immediately thought, okay, catastrophic failure. A phase 3 trial blew up. Or an acquired biotech was basically selling snake oil.
Right, because an impairment charge means an asset isn't going to generate the cash you thought it would, so you have to write it down.
But Denton didn't frame it as a disaster.
No, he framed it as a strategic clearing of the decks. It's a fascinating look into the ruthlessness of managing a pharma portfolio.
Right. The drug in question was Dasatamab vedotin, or DB. It was targeted for bladder cancer.
And Denton admitted they are deprioritizing DB, not because it's poisoning patients.
Right, it's not a safety issue.
Exactly. It's because another drug in their own pipeline, Padcev, is performing so incredibly well that it just destroyed DB's commercial use case.
So their own drug cannibalized their other drug.
Pretty much. Padcev is generating such phenomenal data, the standard of care for urothelial cancer is shifting. By the time DB could hit the market, the bar set by Padcev would just be too high.
So DB would never capture meaningful market share. It's like a sports team trading away a perfectly good bench player because your starter just won MVP.
That's a great way to put it.
But still, $4.4 billion is a tough pill for investors to swallow. It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy test.
It is. They poured hundreds of millions into DB. Most boards would push it over the finish line just to justify the spend.
Just to have it on the market.
Right. But Denton and Borla are saying, no, kill the program. Take the $4.4 billion shrapnel right now.
Rip the Band-Aid off.
Exactly. And reallocate every remaining dollar to the winning asset.
Because they know the clock is ticking on that LOE cliff. They can't fund okay drugs anymore.
No luxury for that. Especially when you look at the mechanics of the cliff. Denton expects a $1.5 billion hit in 2026 just from generics.
And then there's the 2028 expiration of Vyndaqel. Steve Scala, an analyst from TD Cowen, really pushed Albert Bourla on this.
Yeah, he was basically throwing Bourla a lifeline. Usually a CEO will say, oh, we have litigation or a formulation tweak to reset the patent clock.
They give some corporate reassurance, but Bourla completely rejected it.
He literally said, quote, there is no strategy whatsoever.
Wow.
Which is a stark departure from the usual pharma playbook.
By admitting that on an earnings call, he's telling the market that Pfizer's valuation has to be based entirely on inventing the future, not protecting the past.
Right, and to replace a multi-billion-dollar drug like Vyndaqel, you have to target the largest markets on Earth.
You don't replace it with a niche treatment. You go after metabolic health and obesity.
The $150 billion global market.
It's not just an opportunity, it's a structural necessity for their survival at this point.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Chris Boshoff, the chief scientific officer. He presented on their obesity pipeline.
Specifically the VESPR3 trials, right? For their investigational GLP-1 receptor agonist.
Yes, currently known as 344.
Now, the GLP-1 space is heavily saturated. We all know the weekly injections that have become a cultural phenomenon.
People can't get enough of them.
Right, they're selling faster than they can make the glass vials. So if Pfizer's entering late, they can't just drop another weekly shot?
They have to change the game fundamentally. And 3944 is engineered to do exactly that. Boshoff announced it's the first peptide designed to be administered monthly without losing efficacy.
Monthly. That is a huge shift. Let's look at the top-line data from that VESPR3 trial.
So at week 28, the placebo-adjusted weight loss was 10% on the low dose.
And 12.3% on the medium dose.
Right. And they ran a predictive model for the highest dose, which is 9.6 milligrams monthly.
And that projected nearly 16% weight loss.
Yes. And crucially, Boshoff noted that the weight loss curve had not plateaued at week 28.
No plateau, which means it could keep going because the trial runs through week 64.
Exactly. But the real triumph here was the tolerability profile.
I was going to say, if you take a drug that slows gastric emptying and you cram a whole month's worth into one shot, your stomach is going to rebel.
Right. You'd expect a massive spike in the drug concentration in the blood, leading to severe nausea.
But the data showed the opposite.
Totally the opposite. The adverse events were overwhelmingly mild or moderate. Only one single instance of severe nausea or vomiting across the cohort.
And 0 instances of severe diarrhea.
None.
Which is wild. How do they actually achieve this biologically?
Yeah.
Because the molecular engineering is fascinating.
It really is. So historically, long-acting peptides are engineered to bind to albumin to avoid being filtered out by the kidneys.
Right. Albumin is like a carrier protein. I think of it like a molecular taxicab in your blood.
A taxicab, exactly. It acts as a shield.
But the bottleneck with older GLP-1s is that the peptide is inactive while it's in the taxi.
Yes. It has to physically detach from the albumin to engage with the GLP-1 receptors in the pancreas and brain.
And the second it leaves the taxi, it's vulnerable to being cleared out of the body, which is why they only last a week.
Exactly. So Pfizer bypassed this limitation. They used a specific modification called lipidation at the terminal end of the amino acid chain.
So they put the lipid molecule at the very ends instead of the middle.
Right, to solve the problem of steric hindrance.
Meaning the physical shape doesn't block the receptor binding site anymore.
Spot on. Because of that terminal lipidation, 3944 can bind to the GLP-1 receptor while it is still firmly attached to the albumin taxi.
So it never has to leave the taxi to do its job.
Never. It stays bound to this massive protein, so its clearance rate slows to a crawl. That steady state activation lasts an entire month.
And that steady state is why you don't get the nausea. You don't get a huge spike of free-floating drug and then a trough. It's just smooth.
Smooth and continuous. It completely solves the compliance friction for patients.
But, an analyst from JP Morgan, Chris Schott, brought up a good point. He said the 16% weight loss is competitive, but it might not be the highest ceiling on the market compared to some of the new dual agonist weekly shots.
Right. So the question becomes, does convenience beat maximum efficacy?
If it's slightly lower weight loss, does a monthly shot still win? Pfizer's commercial team says yes. They argue persistence keeping people on the drug for years is much higher if it's only once a month.
But clinically, they are already stacking the deck. They aren't just relying on convenience.
Right. They are running early stage trials on another molecule, 3945.
Which is an amylin analog.
And amylin is a totally different target.
Yeah, unlike GLP-1, amylin is a hormone co-secreted with insulin. It drastically slows gastric emptying and suppresses glucagon after a meal.
So they tested combining the GLP-1 with this amylin analog, and they saw an additive 5% weight loss by just day 8.
Day 8. The biological synergy of hitting both pathways simultaneously could easily bridge any efficacy gap.
So they have the biology side figured out. But the commercial rollout strategy Alexandra discussed is just as important for investors.
Alexandra is the international commercial lead, and he pointed out a structural advantage with obesity drugs.
The out-of-pocket spending.
Exactly. Usually, launching a drug globally means years of brutal negotiations with nationalized health systems, like NICE in the UK.
Right. The government demands huge price cuts before they reimburse a drug.
But the demand for weight loss therapeutics is so high, patients are just bypassing their health systems and paying cash.
Alexandra noted that outside the US, which is about 40% of this global market, there's a huge willingness to pay out of pocket.
Like $250 to $350 a month.
Which means Pfizer can launch globally the moment they get regulatory clearance. No waiting 2 years for a government committee to argue about price.
It accelerates their path to peak revenue dramatically, and their timeline is aggressive. They are advancing over 20 obesity trials this year.
With the goal of first approvals in 2028.
Which just happens to be the exact year Vyndaqel falls off the cliff.
A perfectly synchronized baton pass. They are betting that by 2028, millions of people will have hit their target weight using weekly shots.
But obesity is chronic. You stop the drug, the weight returns.
So patients hit the maintenance phase, they get fatigued by weekly needles, and they flock to Pfizer's monthly option.
It's brilliant positioning. So if obesity is the cash flow engine, oncology is where they are fundamentally changing the standard of care.
Right. Let's pivot to oncology. They spent $43 billion acquiring Seagen, which was a massive gamble.
But Beauchoff's update showed it's paying off. Usually when you merge biotech cultures, all the key scientists leave.
But the core scientific community in Seattle stayed with Pfizer.
And they desperately need that institutional knowledge to run the ADC pipeline.
ADCs, antibody-drug conjugates. Let's talk about Padcev again, the drug that killed off DB.
Right, so Beauchoff announced that Padcev, combined with Pembro, is entering phase 3 trials aimed at potentially eliminating the need for cystectomies.
In certain bladder cancer patients. And we should explain that cystectomy is a profoundly morbid procedure.
It's devastating. Removing the bladder requires major reconstructive surgery.
Often routing urine to an external stoma bag or building a neobladder from intestine. The psychological and physical impact is just brutal.
Not to mention the mortality risk of the surgery itself.
So if Padcev can shrink the tumor so completely that surgery isn't needed.
You aren't just improving survival stats, you are preserving the patient's fundamental anatomy and dignity.
And the mechanism making this possible is the ADC. It's basically a targeting antibody, a chemical linker, and a toxic payload.
Right. But the innovation here isn't the concept of an ADC, it's the specific payload Seagen developed.
Historically, ADCs used payloads that disrupted microtubules during cell division.
But Pfizer is leaning heavily into topoisomerase inhibitors, Topo1 and Topo2 payloads.
Topoisomerase is the enzyme that unwinds DNA so it can replicate, right?
Exactly. If you inhibit it, the cancer cell's DNA literally shatters when it tries to divide.
And these topo inhibitors have what they call a bystander effect.
Yes. The payload molecules are slightly membrane permeable.
Meaning once the ADC destroys the target cancer cell, the toxic payload can leak out into the tumor microenvironment.
Right. And it kills adjacent cancer cells that might not even express the target antigen.
It's literally a localized cluster bomb.
And they are directing these cluster bombs at really tough targets, like sigvotatug vedotin or SV.
SV is targeting second-line non-squamous metastatic non-small cell lung cancer.
It targets integrin beta-6, which is an antigen highly expressed in solid tumors.
But lung cancer trials are tough to sell to Wall Street. Akash Tiwari from Jefferies pushed back pretty hard on the call.
He did. He pointed out that ADCs tested against standard chemo in this setting have historically been underwhelming.
The lung cancer microenvironment is notoriously immunosuppressive.
But Boshoff defended it with phase 2 data. SV showed an overall response rate of over 30%.
And a median overall survival of 16.3 months. Which, in advanced second-line lung cancer, is highly relevant. And it gets better. When they combined SV with pembrolizumab, a PD-1 inhibitor, the overall response rate jumped to 57%.
And the disease control rate exceeded 90%.
90% disease control. That is the armor they are using against Wall Street skepticism.
And that synergy leads right into their bispecific antibodies, like 4404.
Oh, man. 4404. This is a PD-1 and VEGF bispecific. We really need to unpack this mechanism.
Right, so a bispecific antibody has two distinct binding arms.
It hits PD-1, which is the cloaking mechanism cancer uses to hide from T cells.
And it hits VEGF, which is the protein tumors secrete to trigger the growth of new blood vessels.
To supply the tumor with oxygen and food.
Exactly, so you are suffocating the tumor's food supply while stripping away its immune camouflage at the same time.
But the craziest part of 4404 is the conditional activation.
The proximity trigger. Boshoff noted it has a 100-fold increase in binding affinity for PD-1, but only in the presence of VEGF.
Wait, explain that in plain English.
Basically, the drug stays inactive while it circulates through healthy tissue, so you don't get systemic autoimmune toxicity.
But when it floats into the high VEGF environment of the tumor bed,
the physical structure shifts, and its affinity for the target amplifies by 2 orders of magnitude.
It's literally a smart bomb that only arms itself when it's physically inside the tumor.
Exactly. It's incredible. And combining this with their ADCs, they are building a modular oncology platform.
But here is the bottom line for investors. Running concurrent phase 3 trials for multiple ADCs, 20 obesity trials, a bispecific platform.
It costs an astronomical amount of money.
And they are facing a patent cliff. Yet they are committing to an $11 billion R&D budget.
So to pay for the science of tomorrow, they have to gut the operational costs of today.
Enter artificial intelligence.
Right. When a CEO starts talking about AI on an earnings call, the market usually rolls its eyes.
It sounds like they're just throwing buzzwords around to pump the stock.
But Borla detailed a physical infrastructure rollout. They are expanding to over 1,200 enterprise-grade GPUs.
Over the next 2 years. Now, Evan Seigerman from BMO Capital Markets pushed back on this. Because anyone can buy GPUs.
Right. Throwing compute at a problem doesn't equal ROI.
So how does a GPU cluster actually alter a manufacturing plant or a trial?
They gave highly specific use cases. Starting with manufacturing, they call it golden batch optimization.
Because biologic manufacturing uses these massive bioreactors. And the yield is super sensitive to microscopic variations.
Temperature, feed rates, oxygen, agitation speeds. The AI doesn't just monitor these.
Right. It ingests millions of data points across the global network in real time.
It runs predictive models to find the exact parameters for the highest yield and purity.
And then it autonomously adjusts the bioreactors to maintain it. It eliminates human error.
And Denton confirmed phase 1 of this generated $600 million in hard savings in 2025 alone.
$600 million. And they're on track to hit $1.5 billion in manufacturing savings by 2027.
The AI is literally paying for its own servers just by reducing waste.
But they are also using it for commercial operations. Alexander described how regulatory compliance is a huge bottleneck.
Right. To launch a drug globally, every marketing piece has to be manually reviewed and translated for hundreds of different countries.
It takes armies of lawyers and months of lead time.
But their custom AI platform can now instantly ingest a marketing asset translate it, and autonomously adjust the medical claims to comply with local laws everywhere at once.
By collapsing that timeline, they are driving toward a total cost realignment target of $5.7 billion in net savings by 2026.
$5.7 billion. That pays for a lot of R&D.
Speaking of R&D, BioHeaven said they are physically embedding AI engineers alongside clinicians.
Right, in discovery and clinical trial execution, this is how they increase trial volume without blowing up the budget.
The AI parses epidemiological data to find the best geographical sites for trials, sites with high patient density,
which vastly accelerates patient enrollment, the most expensive part of drug development.
Now, buried in all this talk about AI, obesity, and oncology was a massive wild card.
The Lyme disease vaccine.
Yes. They expect phase 3 data in the first half of 2026 for the Valor trial. This is a first-in-class Lyme disease vaccine.
And Lyme disease is a rapidly expanding public health crisis. BioHeaven noted there are roughly 400,000 cases annually in the U.S.
And 132,000 in Europe. And as climate change expands tick habitats, it's just going up.
Right now, there is no approved human vaccine.
Because the bacteria Borrelia burgdorferi is notoriously tricky. It alters its surface proteins to evade the immune system.
Antigenic variation.
Right. So the vaccine Pfizer is testing in Valor is a multivalent protein subunit vaccine. It targets the outer surface protein A, or OSPI.
And it's multivalent, meaning it targets 6 different serotypes of that protein.
It casts a wide net across the northern hemisphere. But the mechanism is the coolest part.
It's wild. It stimulates the human body to produce antibodies against OSPI.
And when a tick bites you and starts feeding, it ingests your antibodies.
Yeah. And the antibodies attack the bacteria inside the tick's gut.
They neutralize the bacteria before it can even migrate into your bloodstream.
It is brilliant. If Valor data is positive, this fundamentally alters how humans interact with the outdoors.
It's a massive preventative blockbuster.
And it perfectly illustrates the duality of pharma right now. You've got $4 billion accounting write-offs.
And scientists engineering molecules to kill bacteria inside a tick's stomach. So, synthesizing all of this, what is the bottom line for the retail investor? The story of Pfizer's Q4 2025 is radical transformation under extreme duress.
They are marching toward a guaranteed 1.5 billion generic erosion in 2026.
And the total loss of Vyndaqel in 2028.
To survive, they're using AI to ruthlessly strip 5.7 billion in operational costs out of their network.
And pushing those savings entirely into the R&D casino.
Betting the company on precision ADCs and a monthly GLP-1 peptide to capture the obesity maintenance market.
It is a full corporate metamorphosis. The Pfizer of 2021 was a COVID vaccine logistics engine.
The Pfizer of 2030 is going to be a highly integrated biotech data hybrid, focused entirely on oncology and metabolic health.
And whether you are an investor, a patient managing a chronic condition, or just trying to protect your family from a tick bite, this transcript dictates your future.
But there is a profound philosophical question here embedded in this massive AI pivot.
What's that?
We talked about 1,200 GPUs optimizing bioreactors, but as these computational models get better,
right,
as they learn to accurately predict how an ultra-long-acting peptide behaves or how a bispecific antibody folds in a tumor.
Yeah, if the AI can predict toxicology and efficacy in silico.
Exactly. If it vastly reduces the failure rate of early-stage molecules, are we witnessing the end of the traditional 10-year drug development cycle?
Wow. If that cycle collapses from 10 years to 3.
What happens to human health when artificial intelligence can design a customized targeting mechanism faster than human biology can adapt?
We aren't just looking at a new pipeline. We're looking at a new velocity of medical evolution.
Precisely. It recontextualizes the whole earnings call. You aren't just doing accounting.
You're looking at an architectural schematic for the future of human biology, and it's being engineered right now, one GPU at a time.
It's truly a fascinating time to be watching this space.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in to Talk Pickers, and we'll see you next time.